Chaitanya Charitamrita ki, Prana. Reading from Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, preaching in America. So this is one interviewer, one reporter. She's interviewing Srila Prabhupada. You have said that you are very small, she began, and that you are not God. Yet it appears to me as an outsider that the devotees treat you as if you were God. Prabhupada, yes, that is devotee's duty. Just like a government officer, personally he is not very important, but so long as he executes a government order, he should be respected as the government. That is the way. Even if an ordinary policeman comes, you have to respect him because he is a government man. But that does not mean he is respected. If that man thinks I have become government, people are respecting me, then he is foolish. But the etiquette is that when the government man comes, you should give him respect as a government. Of course, that's quite questionable these days. But the point is, if someone's representing God, just like that's mentioned in the Guru Astam Shaddaritve Nasamasta Shastra, spiritual master is to be respected as God, but he's not God. And one time, even some disciples of Prabhupada took it a stage too far, and they started spreading a rumor that Prabhupada's God, and they totally blasted him. He was very angry. He said, I never said that. I never said I was God. Because sometimes people, they get some mystic yogic powers, and then they try to cheat people, saying, yes, I am God, and you too can become God. And Prabhupada made the point that God is always God. He doesn't become God. The Supreme Being is always a Supreme Being. It's never overcome by illusion. Just like light is never overcome by darkness. Darkness is simply the absence of light. So Prabhupada, he's saying that because I'm the representative of Krishna, then I'm training you how to relate to Krishna, not that I am Krishna. So he gives that example. So Prabhupada ki Jaya. Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. From Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila, Volume 4, Chapter 17. So I was reminded, just as Prabhupada was giving that lesson, I was thinking, Jabbit put a garland on me, and it's not that I'm in the same mood. It's not that I'm expecting a garland or I deserve a garland or something, but the idea is that we honour the Shastra or the Vedic literatures, and when everyone, and sometimes in temples they actually have the Vedic literatures on the altar, and sometimes they only have the books on the altar. They worship the books like that because Krishna's words are non-different from Krishna. So when someone is speaking, then the person who's the speaker of the Bhagavad Gita, Chaitanya, Charitamrita, like that, then generally give them some kind of elevated seat and garland like that. And so it's not that the person should be proud thinking, I'm so elevated, I'm given a seat. It's actually the Bhagavatam and the Shastras, the words of Krishna, which we're giving regard to. It's just like we don't put these books on the floor, because the floor is where your feet go. They always have to be put somewhere. You don't step over them. We always show honour and respect to the Shastra, scriptures. So we're reading from Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila 17, and we're starting at 32. Because there's no purports, then I'll just read through a few of them. So Lord Chaitanya is travelling to Vrindavan, and he was just bathing and chanting his Gayatri mantra when some elephants came before him. And then the Lord splashed some water on him and asked him to chant the holy name. Say Jala Bindu Kana Lagaya Ragaya, say Krishna Krishna Kai Premi Nachigaya. The elephants whose bodies were touched by the water, splashed by the Lord, began to chant Krishna Krishna and dance and sing in ecstasy. So we might think, how is that possible? When did we ever hear an elephant chant? So of course, whether they chanted like we hear it or whether they chanted in their own language, just like Prabhupada said, there was no material what do you call it? Impediment. There's no material impediment. So that to the extent here, Krishna is actually he appeared as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Sri Krishna Chaitanya. He's none different from Krishna. And because Krishna is the origin of all living entities, then he doesn't see it as an elephant, he sees it as his eternal part and parcel spirit. So the elephant body is simply just another temporary body. Just like we have a body just now, but we may have been in an elephant body, an ant body, any other body before. The consciousness is the same thing, which is animating all these bodies. So Aham Brahmasmi is the first thing we learn in spiritual life is I am spirit soul, I'm not the body, I'm not the mind, I'm not the intelligence. So our body is always changing, but we remain the same. The body we had when we were 5 years old, that's all gone now. We have another body. The body's always changing, the cells are renewing. But we're the same person experiencing life. It's not that we look back and think that was someone else. We may have thought differently because of our experiences at that time. And the mind is also changeable. We can change our mind. We can make up our mind. It's our faculty. The same with our intelligence. We can use our intelligence or not use our intelligence. So, but beyond that is the soul, the spiritual spark, the consciousness which is giving life to the body. And that consciousness is present in all species, moving and non-moving. Because it suits mankind to ignore that so they can exploit other living entities, other species, that's why they choose to not believe in the soul. So here, Lord Chaitanya, simply by asking, being that he's Krishna, the Sarva Karana Karanam, the cause of all causes, the origin of all, Anadir Adir Govinda, Sarva Karana Karanam, he's the origin of all living entities. There are his eternal parts and parcels. Then the elephants, their original pure Krishna consciousness was reawakened by Lord Chaitanya's mercy. Kiha bhume pade kiha karaye chitkara deki bhattacharya ramane haya chamatkara. Some of the elephants fell to the ground and some screamed in ecstasy. Seeing this, Balabhadra Bhattacharya was completely astonished. Pateyayate. So the natural constitutional position of the living entity is that eternal, full of bliss and full of knowledge. So when these living entities in the elephant's body were immediately reawakened to their eternal consciousness, then they were ecstatic. and they were overwhelmed with spiritual ecstasy. Patiyati Kari Prabhu Ucha Sankirtana Madhura Kanta Dvani Shuni Aisi Mrigi Gana. Sometimes Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu chanted very loudly while passing through the jungle. Hearing his sweet voice, all the does came near him. So the doe is the female deer. Actually, I was just reminded that Radhanath Maharaj was giving a talk of, he used to live in the jungles in the Himalayan foothills, and he became acquainted with some yogis who were very advanced, and he came across one yogi who had lived in the jungle for many, many years, and he said that the animals won't bother you if you're not afraid of them and you have no tinge to exploit them. He said, but as soon as you have a little tinge to exploit, or that you have any fear, they'll detect that and they'll kill you. Because typically we're talking about tigers and things like that, snakes. So in this way, then Radhanath Maharaj learned how to live without fear, living in the jungle with this yogi. And of course, no possessions, but this is very attractive, isn't it, to live without fear? No matter how much opulence we accumulate, say someone wins £100 million on the lottery, it doesn't free them from fear, does it? What do? They get a big, big house and they put a huge, big fence around it because they're afraid. So this is a better opulence, to be free from attachment, fear, and anger. These are the spiritual opulences, which means that in any situation materially, you can be fearless, you can be satisfied. You're not depending on having an army, having a big fence, having a shotgun. So these symptoms of fear are prevalent in society. But Lord Chaitanya's, he's just showing that if we simply take shelter in chanting Krishna's name, because Krishna is known as Ajita, unconquerable. No one can defeat Krishna. So if you're taking shelter in Krishna, then that's the best method of self-defense. Just like Prabhupada was giving this talk, it was maybe Los Angeles, and he was speaking with some devotees in the next building. They could hear all these shouts of these martial artists practicing. Sometimes they go like, and they make, if you've ever seen a Bruce Lee film, he makes these really, I don't know if they do that in real life or if it's just part of the movies, but he makes these really kind of high-pitched screaming and yelling noises. And Prabhupada says that this yelling won't save them at the time of death. And it's actually, we have some personal experience of one man we knew from our hometown. He was hailed as being like top martial artist in Aikido. And nobody, although there was many hard men in our town, nobody would even think to challenge this guy. But then he caught some cancer, and that he couldn't defend himself against that. So materially, no matter what we try to do to defend ourselves, this body is temporary. And unless we utilize it to cultivate awareness of our spiritual nature, or real nature, or true nature, which is transcendental to the changing temporary nature, unless we do that, then we're missing out on a great fortune. Dahine vame dvani shuni yaya prabhu sange prabhu tara anga muche shloka padirange. Hearing the Lord's vibration, all the does followed him left and right. While reciting a verse with great curiosity, the Lord patted them. So the animals weren't afraid of him at all because he was no threat to them. So this is just like Radhanath Maharaj was saying, that if they don't detect any threat from you, don't detect any fear from you, then there will be there's no threat from them. So this is the verse that Lord Chaitanya quoted. Danyasma muda matayopi harinya eta yananda nandanam upata vichitra vesham akarnya venuranitam saha krishna sara pujam dadur virachitam pranaya valokai. And blessed are all these foolish deer because they have approached Maharaj Nanda's son, who's gorgeously dressed and is playing on his flute. Indeed, both the does and the bucks worship the Lord with looks of love and devotion. This is a verse from Srimad Bhagavatam 10:21-11, spoken by the gopis of Vrindavan. So it's interesting that Lord Chaitanya quotes this verse because he's actually saying, from here we can see that, so Maharaj Nanda's son is Krishna. Of course, you could say, how can God be the son of anybody? But in order to please his devotees, there's different rasas or relationships that the Lord allows himself to be related to. So can anyone name these 5 rasas or relationships? Or even set any of them? Anything, yeah. Portuguese. So that's dasya, means servitorship. One likes to relate to Krishna as a servant. Neutrality, that's called shantaras. Jugal. Parental and fraternal. Yeah. So Sakya is fraternity, friend. If one likes to have Krishna as your friend, then Krishna will reciprocate like that. Madhurya, conjugal, if one likes to have Krishna as your lover, just like in the Rasa dance picture we can see that, then Krishna will reciprocate with that. If one likes to have that parental, paternal-maternal instinct and relate to Krishna with that, he'll reciprocate with that, just like we see the picture of Mother Yashoda. Now, it's not that Krishna is dependent on his mother or father, but he actually takes great pleasure in reciprocating with his devotees who like to treat him like that. And this is actually pure, it's not tinged with some material thing. So Maharaj Nanda's son is Krishna, and the deer approach Krishna like this. So Lord Chaitanya is quoting this verse, which basically means that the deer are approaching him also because he is Krishna. The same thing. And they were worshipping him simply by looking at him with love and affection. So there's many different ways that Krishna can be worshipped. And Krishna is actually so keen and enthusiastic to benefit the living entities that even if they come to him with ill motivation, he can take the good from that. It's like Lord Chaitanya said that we should try to see the good in everyone. And of course, we've heard that many times from many different sources. And the example was given also that Putana, who actually smeared poison on her breast with the intention to kill baby Krishna, then he didn't take it as that she was coming with ill intent to kill, but actually she thought, oh, here's someone coming to nurse me. Let me accept this service. So Krishna is like that. He's always looking for ways to uplift the souls in the material world who have forgotten their eternal constitutional position. And he's looking for ways to try to benedict them and benefit them so that they can remember who they really are and come back to him. Just like you could imagine if you had a child who got lost and had amnesia and you're trying to remind it where it came from, you'd be more enthusiastic to remind them than they would be, because they wouldn't even remember about it. They're thinking, who are you? I don't need you. So that's what we're like. You know, who's Krishna? Never heard of him, don't know who he is, don't need him. I'm a self-made person. But we're forgetting that all these things are coming from Krishna. So, next verse. Hena kale vyagra tata aila panchashata vyagra mrigi mili chali mahaprabhu satta. While Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was passing through the jungle, 5 or 7 tigers came joining the deer, the tigers began to follow the Lord. So I don't know why they say 5 or 7. Sometimes you hear these descriptions 2 or 4, 4 or 6. So it may be a language thing. So this is, we'll read on and it will become apparent how the tigers can join the deer. Deki Mahaprabhura Vrindavana Smriti Haila Vrindavana Guna Varna Na Sloka Padila. Seeing the tigers and deer following him, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu immediately remembered the land of Vrindavan. He then began to recite a verse describing the transcendental quality of Vrindavan. Yatra Naisarga Durvaira Sahasan Nrimrigadaya Mritani Vajita Vasa Drutarut Tarshanadikam. Translation: Vrindavan is the transcendental abode of the Lord. There is no hunger, anger, or thirst there. Though naturally inimical, human beings and fierce animals live together there in transcendental friendship. Srila Prabhupada's purport. This is a statement from Srimad Bhagavatam 10.13.60. After stealing cowherd boys and calves of Sri Krishna, Lord Brahma kept him asleep and hid them. After a moment, Brahma returned to see Krishna's condition. When he saw that Krishna was still busy with his cowherd boyfriends and animals and was not disturbed, Lord Brahma appreciated the transcendental opulence of Vrindavan. Interesting that there's many attributes to the transcendental abode of Vrindavan, but it's interesting that he mentioned hunger, anger, or thirst there. Anybody think of why he might have mentioned those three?
Is it related to lust, anger, and greed?
Don't know. I don't see the connection. Brenda, you got your hand up, or are you just holding your head up?
They've not had any spiritual bodies. Eternity, bliss, and knowledge.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when Lord Chaitanya's direct disciples were living in Vrindavan around 500 years ago, some of them were so absorbed in their spiritual consciousness, Krishna consciousness, that they would sometimes forget to eat. They would sometimes forget to sleep because they were not connected, they were not in bodily consciousness. When we're in bodily consciousness, then we're thinking, stomach is empty, we have to fill it. I'm feeling thirsty, we have to put something in. Somebody's offended me, I'm going to be angry. Someone's threatening me, then I have to defend myself. So we're always trying to defend the body in some way or another. But when one is in spiritual consciousness and aware that they are eternal by nature, and that their happiness is not depending on anything material, then they're not afflicted by hunger, thirst, anger, because they have no need. They forget about the need to even maintain the body sometimes. In fact, there was one great devotee at Kanchana Das Babaji Maharaj. So on Ekadashi, where we fast from grains once every fortnight, then some devotees go a stage further where they just completely fast. They do nirjal, which means not even water. Jal is water. And his servant, his assistant disciple, wherever they would travel, he would take care of his necessities because he was so absorbed he would forget. Now, you can't imitate this. You might imitate it for a day or two, but pretty soon, your mind and your senses will catch up with you. You might be able to kid yourself on for a little while or fool the innocent public. But this Akinchana Das Babaji Maharaj, when he was fasting, you're supposed to fast and then you're supposed to break the fast after a certain period of time the next morning. But he would just forget. He'd be so absorbed in chanting and spiritual consciousness that he would actually forget to break the fast. And one time he'd been fasting for a couple of days, and the disciple said, you have to break the fast. He said, oh, is it Kaddish you finished? He says, yeah, it finished yesterday. So we can't, sometimes people foolishly, they see the activities of greatly advanced people and they try to imitate that. But that's very dangerous. We should be realistic as to what our own level of advancement is, our own level of our capacity. And naturally it will come, as we advance spiritually, naturally we'll be more attracted to spiritual subject matter, and we become more attracted back to yoga, devotional service, and less inclined towards material pursuits. So it's not simply that it will happen overnight, but gradually, by engaging in devotional service, we begin to lose the taste for material life. So that is the positive alternative. Material life means that we are afflicted by hunger, thirst, anger, and other negative things which are related to the body and the mind in this material world. And by regular practice of Krishna consciousness, then one can gradually minimize these material necessities. And the beauty of devotional service is such that it almost appears like there's no change, because externally we may be doing the same thing. We sit on a chair, we drive in a car, we use shoes, things like that. Once I was distributing books in Falkirk, and this gentleman who considered themselves to be a yoga teacher came up and he gave me a scolding. He says, you're not a yogi. He says, if you were a true yogi, you wouldn't even be wearing shoes. Of course, this was winter in Scotland. And there may have been a time when inhabitants of Scotland were quite poor and they couldn't afford shoes. My mother told me she used to go to school barefoot. That's only, she would have been going to school in the 40s. And it was a standard thing, that people who weren't very well off, big families, going about in the cold streets of Glasgow in your bare feet. It was a reality. So this is not necessarily what yoga is about. Yoga means to link with the Supreme. And Krishna explains, Krishna is the authority on this yoga. In the Bhagavad Gita, he explains that Ashtanga Yoga, the Eightfold Mystic Process. But he also says that yoginam apasarvesham magaten antaratmana shraddhavan bhajate yumam sami yuktatamomataha. That all these yogis are certainly wonderful personalities, glorious, that they can perform the different types of yoga. We don't just mean asanas, but pranayam and dharana, meditation, all these different things. But he says that the topmost yogi is one who is directly connected with him through love, through loving devotional service. That is called Bhakti Yoga, because the other more mechanical methods of controlling the mind and senses lead to the culmination, which is it's all about love. So if one can learn to love directly without going through the troublesome parts of the other processes, that's direct. It doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't, but we can. We can take advantage. We can do pranayama, we can do yoga postures, etc. This is also good for the body, for the mind. But the point Krishna is making is that the culmination of all of this is actually to rekindle our eternal loving relationship with him. And here Lord Chaitanya, being Krishna, is immediately rekindling the loving relationship with all these living entities simply through his chanting. And to the extent that the tigers and the deers forget their natural enmity, they can't even remember that there's a difference in bodily. So we'll just read on this more regarding this. Krishna Krishna Kaha Kari Prabhu Yabiba Lila Krishna Kai Vyagra Mriga Nachite Lagila. When Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, chant Krishna Krishna, the tigers and deer began to chant Krishna and dance. Nachi kunde vyagra gana mrigi gana sange balabhadra bhattacharya deke apurva range. When all the tigers and does danced and jumped, Balabhadra Bhattacharya saw them and was struck with wonder. So Balabhadra Bhattacharya was instructed to follow Lord Chaitanya and keep an eye on him, just to make sure that anything he needed was provided. But of course, Krishna doesn't need anything from anyone but the devotees. Sometimes their sentiment is they want to serve the Lord, and the Lord accepts that service, even though he doesn't need anything. He's Atmarama, or self-sufficient, self-satisfied. Vyagra mriga anyonye kari alingana mukhe bukadiya kari anyonye chumbana. Indeed, the tigers and deer began to embrace one another, and touching mouths they began to kiss. Kautuka dekiya prabhu hasiti lagila tabasabaki tahan chadi agi chaligela. When Chaitanya Mahaprabhu saw all this fun, he began to smile. Finally, he left the animals and continued on his way. So the Lord was very pleased to see that the living entities had given up their natural enmity. And this is the spiritual world. There is no enmity, there's no jealousy, there's no enviousness. Everyone is actually full of wonder at each other's service. In the spiritual world, there's also competition, but that competition is not tinged by envy. Just like nowadays, they try to artificially remove competition from the schools. It's like everybody who takes part in the race is a winner. Now, that's true, that's fine. But then, as some people are saying, there's no impetus for someone to try to improve or succeed because they're trying to cater for the fact that someone is maybe not a good runner, so they come in last and they think, oh, we don't want them to feel bad, so let's just give him a prize as well. Everyone gets a prize. But then what happens with that is that perhaps that person who came last in that race, they might be first in something else. So therefore, sometimes people don't really find out what their talent is, what they're really good at. And everyone's got some special talent, everyone's got some unique value, some unique contribution to give. So it's not that we just whitewash everything, everyone's the same, that's impersonalism. And it might even be that someone's not interested in running, that's why they didn't win the race. You know, sometimes you may be good at something, but you're not even interested. So what you're interested in, this is how the educational system falls short, is that they don't try to ascertain what are the children interested in, what is their natural inclination. That's what they're going to be good at. Or that's what they're going to be satisfied with, rather than these are the choices. You have to accept one of these and think, well, I don't like any of them. This is just limited to fit into some kind of system which is ongoing. But Lord Chaitanya here is showing that because the living entities here in the forms of deer, tigers, etc., they were awakened to their spiritual identity, then they could transcend the external identity of being enemies, one being ferocious and the other one being fearful. So they gave up their anger, gave up their fear, and they were actually able to embrace like that. So of course we shouldn't imitate that, just like we're saying we shouldn't imitate great devotees. We certainly shouldn't imitate going into a forest with dangerous animals and just having a kirtan and thinking, let's see what the deer and the tigers do. The deer will run away and the tiger will munch you. That's what will happen. Unless you're very, very pure. And if you're very pure, you'd be thinking, well, I probably could go and benefit the human society. If you benefit humans, humans have got the potency to do so much good. We can see examples of like one human being, if he's influential, he can do so much bad. Just like see the Second World War, we had Adolf Hitler. He did so much bad, one person, his influence. And one person, Srila Prabhupada, can do so much good. So many living entities are benefiting. benefiting by this one pure devotee coming out of Vrindavan. He was already living in Vrindavan, but he was in a higher state of Vrindavan, which is Vrindavan consciousness. He wasn't physically just living in the holy dham, which in itself is actually beneficial, but he was a proper eternal Brijvasi. And his contribution was not to remain in Vrindavan and benefit himself, but to take Vrindavan to the whole world. And this is what Lord Chaitanya is doing also. He's taking Vrindavan wherever he goes. So this is the potency of the devotee. And this land of Vrindavan is free from all anxieties. Mayuradi Pakshi Gana Prabhure Dekhiya Sange Chalo Krishna Bali Nachi Matahana. Various birds, including the peacock, saw Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and began to follow him, chanting and dancing. They were all maddened by the holy name of Krishna. So we'll leave this next verse for next week, where we find that even the non-moving living entities are also becoming ecstatic. So we'll just ask, anyone get any questions at this point or comments?
In the actual text, it's when something about appreciating Vrindavan, the opulence of Vrindavan. This is the, is that a little bit further back? Appreciated.
Which one?
I think it's the very last
Various.
text. I think it's in the purport of the last text that you read. Oh, do you know? You didn't stop on the purport, maybe in the last text you read. It says that you appreciated the opulence of Vrindavan.
Lord Brahma appreciated the...
Yeah, Lord Brahma appreciated Vrindavan.
Oh yeah, Lord Brahma appreciated the transcendental opulence of Vrindavan.
Yeah, I just thought it's quite a interesting way to look at it, because it was quite a traumatic experience for Lord Brahma. So, but from Krishna's point of view, he just saw that he was cultivating some appreciation in Lord Brahma. And this word appreciation, we say Krishna consciousness, because Kamsa was conscious of Krishna, but he didn't appreciate. So, we want to be Krishna conscious, and we may have to recalibrate what we think that is, how that appreciation is going to come, what circumstances are going to be there to precipitate an appreciation to people.
Yes, so appreciation, if you look at another word which starts with depreciation, which means devalue. So appreciation means that we attribute some value. So to begin with, Lord Brahma, he didn't know the value of Krishna. He thought he was just some little cowherd boy who was becoming too big for his own boots. He thought, I'll show him a lesson, just like Lord Indra, same kind of mentality. But both Indra and Brahma are devotees, and out of Krishna's mercy, he wanted to reduce their pride. So he showed them some of his transcendental opulence, without any effort. Because Krishna is known as Yogeshwar. He was the master of all mystic power. So he doesn't have to perform austerities to get mystic power or strain himself in any way whatsoever. He can do whatever he likes. And Bhakti-Bhava Maharaj was saying that the first thing we learn is about Krishna is that he can do whatever he likes and no one can check him. Of course, if some of us could do whatever we liked, then we'd probably upset a lot of people. We're not so pure. But Krishna is the eternal well-wishing friend. There's three things about Krishna: Supreme Proprietor, Supreme Controller, and the well-wishing friend. So just imagine if someone was the Supreme Proprietor and Supreme Controller, but they weren't the well-wishing friend of all living entities, it would be havoc, wouldn't it? Everyone would be fearful. So therefore, sometimes the concept of the Almighty is someone with great authority, someone to be feared, etc. But that's not the way Krishna works. Krishna is always the eternal well-wishing friend. So being the well-wishing friend of Lord Brahma, he was thinking that Lord Brahma is acting out of pride and ignorance. He's thinking himself to be the controller, the creator. He's forgetting that he's just empowered to do this. So therefore he acted to remove his pride. And Lord Brahma, he appreciated Krishna's power when Lord Brahma kidnapped all the calves and the gopas, or the cowherd boyfriends of Krishna, kidnapped them all. And when he went back to see Krishna, thinking that Krishna would be bewildered, distressed, or whatever, then he seen that Krishna had manifested himself as all the exact same boys and calves. And then Brahma was like bewildered. It's called Brahma Vimohan Lila, or the bewilderment of Lord Brahma's pastime. So Brahma went back to the cave to check, are they still there? Because maybe they all escaped and were back with Krishna. And he went back and they were still all there. And when he went back to see Krishna again, then Krishna had manifested all of those calves and cowherd boys as 4 Vishnu forms to show Brahma that I know what your game is. You think that you're pulling a fly one on me, but I've known it all along, and that I've masterminded this just to remove your ignorance and your pride so that you can remember who you really are. And this is how he appreciated Krishna's offerings. And he appreciated the offerings of Vrindavan, such as these. Also, not only Krishna did he appreciate, but those souls who are Krishna's eternal associates, who realized that these are great souls that he couldn't even aspire to touch their feet. So he was thinking of that. Therefore, he was very humbled. So his realization was very valuable to him, because then he was able to resume his service with the correct attitude, and his pride was checked. And it's interesting because Brahma is the head of our Sampradaya, and we see that even the head of Sampradaya, by some reason or another, he forgot his position, and Krishna gave him a humble lesson and took a lesson. So it's not that he just perfect from work on, and that's like, the lesson is showing that he took that lesson from Krishna.
What if he decided he wants to come quietly and he didn't want to go through? You were looking at the way Krishna's cultivating appreciation at Indra and Brahma, and you think, well, I don't want to go through a very intense process. Is there any way that you can just decide, okay, I'm going to bypass all that? I just want to be proactively appreciative, just even if it's just because I want to save myself all the hassle. Okay?
Yeah, so because it's beyond, Krishna consciousness is beyond mental and intellectual platform, then we can't make a mental adjustment and bypass it. We can't make an intellectual adjustment and bypass it. It has to be, if we want the easy path is Trinada Peace and H&R, Torah Peace Astana, Amana Amana Dena Kirtan Stari, that one can chant the holy name of God in a humble, if you chant the holy name of God in a humble state of mind, thinking oneself rolling the straw on the street, devoid of all sense of false prestige and ready to offer all respect to others, then we can chant the holy name constantly. So that means that to be humble. If we're proud, then that is a stumbling block, and then the path is going to be longer and more difficult. So if we can learn the art of being humble, and we can meditate on these aspects of that verse, that thinking yourself rolling the street, well, the straw on the street. So the straw on the street is nobody even notices it, and it's not protesting. But if somebody doesn't notice us, we take offence. It's like, I'm here, why did you not notice me? For some reason or another, if we do something or we say something and then someone doesn't respond, we think, oh, you're so ignorant, didn't you hear me? It might be that the person's actually deaf. We've experienced that before. The person didn't actually even hear you physically, or there's something going on in their mind and they didn't even know you were talking to them. So if we're not looking for praise, if we can not expect honor, but be prepared to give it to others, then this is certainly the fast lane.
Yeah.
If we want to avoid trouble, then learn the art of being humble. And that means to genuinely see the good in others, genuinely give encouragement and recognition to other people. And then, of course, if someone is practicing that and they're doing it to us, and they're saying, "Oh, you're such a nice devotee," you know, the way you chant your rounds or the way you do your service, your attitude, then we shouldn't become proud at that. We shouldn't be thinking, "Yes, I am. You know, I've been practicing so long, I've become such a great devotee, I'm the most humble here." And we become proud of being humble, and then we lose that humble. So being humble is obviously it takes some practice, because there's a very, very deep desire for recognition, for adoration, for some kind of gain. And if you ever have a conversation with some elevated soul who is humble, and you try to humble them, then it's, you know, you realise you're out of your depth. And this is something we have to be careful of. For associating with the elevated souls, and they just appear very normal and whatever. They could actually, just like I remember sometimes speaking with Janananda Raj and thinking, if I'm not careful, I could just be thinking he's just like a buddy, just like a mate. And you see sometimes people refer and relate to very advanced spiritual masters just like that because they're so accessible. You think that's actually a bit of a stumbling block there. It's foolish to think, you know, he's just your mate because he's being so friendly. And then, so I found myself having to guard myself, even though he's been joking with me. It's actually a great, it's great mercy that, you know, someone of advanced consciousness is very friendly with us. Prabhupada would joke with his disciples as well, but when he was serious, they would take him serious. So we have to be careful, because familiarity breeds contempt. If we become too familiar with someone who is able to give us spiritual advancement, and then the opportunity comes when spiritual advancement is there, that we have to direct us in some way, and we think, "Who are you? You know, 2 minutes ago you were joking with me, you can't tell me anything." So that's why we have to always try to be on guard. And Krishna, there's no devotee he won't go to check their pride. You know, it's one of the most unattractive features. Krishna is attracted by devotional service, but if a devotee becomes proud, then he'll make some lesson to teach the devotee to give up their pride. Even with the gopis of Vrindavan, sometimes that would happen. They would think, "Well, Krishna is dancing with me, I'm the most, I'm getting all the attention from Krishna." Then as soon as they think like that, he'd leave them and go to someone else.
It's interesting, isn't it, that pride actually reduces your appreciation. It's like tasting, you're at a feast and you're tasting something, and it doesn't taste so good after a while. You wonder, why does it not taste? So you're thinking the pride's going to do you a favour, it's going to set you up, make you feel more important. But the very thing that you're doing, your devotional service, starts losing its taste because it's been ruined by the pride.
Yeah, it's a good point. The pride is actually the enemy of advancement in spiritual life, because we want to be, the more proud we are, the more we want to be appreciated. We're blowing our own trumpet all the time. "Look at me, look what I did, look what I said." And we have aspects of that's in there, but can we not just achieve something worthwhile without expecting, you know, a fanfare to announce it? Can we not just do something for the good of ourselves or others or the world without having to declare it to the world? So that's good. And sometimes you can actually give yourself a little test, a little exercise like that. Go and do something with the intention that I don't want somebody to recognise this. Sometimes you can do this, go and do something for another devotee, like you see their dirty jacket lying around, sort of, and take it and wash it and put it back. And then when they say, "Who did this?" we're going up to it. We're going to clean their shoes or something. We can do some service. If we start with that motivation, then our devotional service is certainly going to take us forward very quickly. And it's much sweeter as well.
Yeah, the funny thing is, it's a paradox, is that the more you appreciate others, the more you appreciate yourself. And the whole idea of pride is, "I've got my own back here, you know," and you're thinking you're appreciating yourself. So it's interesting, isn't it, that it's counterintuitive. It's exactly the opposite of what you think it's going to be. You think, "Well, if I start appreciating everybody else, there'll be none left for me." But if you do go around appreciating everybody else, you start feeling like Well, I'm actually quite a nice guy, you know. And then you do start appreciating yourself.
Well, it's nice to mind the point that material advancement, spiritual advancement are diametrically opposites of each other. So the more proud you become, the more you can put others down. So to advance materially, you have to put others down. That one's like this, that one's like that, put them down, they're all below me. So therefore, who's the best? You emerge as the guy who knows everything about everybody and everything about everything, and nobody's better than you. Therefore, you're the top dog. But in spiritual life, the devotees compete by trying to be more humble than each other, or trying to be more humble than themselves, more humble than they are. Thinking, how can I give up my pride? I'm such a fool, thinking I'm the doer. I don't have control of anything. We think we're the controller. And we get a cold, and we get a virus. Even new people are catching the virus, like Shiva Maharaj, he caught the virus, and he was thinking that everybody is at risk some way or another, but he's taken so much, and his devotees have taken so much, put so much checks and balances to prevent him getting it, and still he got it. So he was making the point there, that no matter how much you try, you're going to get it, you're going to get it. So we can make so many different arrangements to try to protect ourselves in some way, but anyway, the idea of spiritual advancement is that we don't put ourselves above others, we put others above ourselves. And by doing that, then naturally you rise ahead. And those who have spiritual vision will see that. Those who have material vision, they think, never admit you're wrong. I remember one so-called spiritual personality saying that, but he wasn't being a spiritual personality for very long. Because if you can admit you're wrong, then you can learn. If you never admit you're wrong, how are you going to see what your mistakes are, what your shortcomings are, and how you're going to advance from that? And even as we were saying, the past time of Lord Brahma, he admitted he was wrong. He had the humble pie, and he learned a lesson, and that's there for all of us to do that. We may make mistakes. Spiritual life, spiritual perfection is not the same as material perfection, where you don't put a foot wrong in life. Spiritual perfection means that even though externally there may be mistakes, we're willing to admit them. So we had one devotee who lived, I'll just finish with this, one devotee who lived here some time ago, Mother Ranjini, and we didn't realise how greatly advanced spiritually she was until she got sick. She got a brain tumour, and then we started to see the behaviour of her was such that it just attracted respect. Now she was always respectful to people, and she would do her service very diligently, and she wasn't ostentatious about anything, and she would always be respectful to others, and because of that ability to be respectful to others, she gained so much respect. But when we're just looking for respect, then we don't gain it very much. When we demand respect, so they say we should not demand it, but command it, which means we have to live an example where people will respect that. But if you're doing it for that reason, then you're still commanding it, you're still demanding it. So it's one of these things that we should, in order to be respectable, we should be respectful. If we're full of respect, that means that respect comes back to us. So any last things, or shall we just finish there? Okay. Let's go over the key. Prabhupada key. Chaitanya, Charitamrita key.
Prana.